Religion has profoundly influenced the sweeping American narrative, perhaps more than any other force in our history, from the time of the indigenous peoples to the present day. The National Museum of American Religion tells the surprising and compelling story of what religion has done to America and what America has done to religion, including the establishment of the revolutionary and indispensable idea of religious freedom as a governing principle in the U.S., inviting all to explore the role of religion in shaping the social, political, economic, and cultural lives of Americans and thus America itself. Join us for Season 3 of our podcast series, Religion and the American Experience, as we follow scholars and others deep into America's religious history and learn how it can inform and animate us as citizens grappling with complex questions of governance and American purpose in the 21st century. Episodes will be released monthly on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Religion and the American Experience, a podcast series of the Digital First National Museum of American Religion. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcast fix, and be sure to tell your colleagues, friends, and family about us. Chaplains play a unique and exceptionally meaningful role in the American landscape. Clergy attached to the branches of our armed forces who minister to those of their individual faith, to facilitate ministry to those of other faiths, and to care for all, including those who claim no religious faith at all. Today, Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff, or Arnie, as he likes to be called, joins us to tell his story. Arnold E. Resnicoff was born in Washington, D.C., and attended Dartmouth College, where he studied drama. Arnie then served a tour in Vietnam, including as part of Operation Game Warden, the campaign to keep the rivers free of Viet Cong infiltrators. After the war, he became a rabbi, then a chaplain, serving in that position for 25 years in the United States Navy. Arnie was part of the small group of veterans who worked to create the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., delivering the closing prayer at its 1982 dedication. He was in Beirut on that fateful day when the Marine barracks were bombed, October 23, 1983. His eyewitness report, written at the request of the White House, was read in full by President Ronald Reagan as a keynote speech to the 20,000 attendees of Jerry Falwell's Baptist Fundamentalism 84 convention. Arnie was the first Jewish chaplain to attend the Naval War College and the first chaplain of any faith to teach a course there entitled Faith and Force, Religion, War, and Peace. He served as Command Chaplain for the U.S. European Command, the top chaplain for U.S. chaplains of all faiths in all branches of the armed forces in all of Europe and most of Africa. Arnie has offered more prayers to open sessions of the House and Senate as guest chaplain than any other rabbi in history. After retirement from the Navy, he served as National Director for Interreligious Affairs for the American Jewish Committee and Special Assistant for Values and Vision to the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, a position that carried with it the military equivalent rank of Brigadier General. Arnie, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm honored to be here.
Arnie, can you give us a glimpse of your early life up until, say, college, including your religious background?
I was born in Washington, D.C. When I was 2, my family moved to a suburb in Maryland. That's where I grew up. I was the oldest of 3 boys, and my father was born in Russia, escaped the pogroms when he was only 3 years old, and he landed in America. And I have so many memories, but 2 impacts from my father. One, he was so patriotic. They were so happy to have made it to America. And that's why I ended up going in the Navy. I was the oldest of the 3, and he just convinced me that I should continue to repay our dues. My father didn't have a military career, but he quit his job the day after Pearl Harbor, and he served in World War II until the end. The other way he impacted me, I remember the first day he took me to elementary school, and I saw other little kids shake hands with their parents. They looked like aliens to me because we always hugged and kissed. There was really a Russian element in the way he loved me. The other person who had a giant impact on me in high school was the drama teacher. His name was Ed Justice. I went to a public high school, 3,000 students. And because of this man, drama was as important as football in the high school. And he cast me in the Diary of Anne Frank, which really was life-changing in a way for me. It was one of my first experiences with the Holocaust, and it gave me a lifelong love. Coincidentally, one of the other high school students in the play had two parents who had survived the Holocaust, and they were the first Holocaust survivors I had ever met. And that had such a giant impact on me because they were so filled with faith. They told me these horrible stories, and I was amazed that they just didn't throw out religion or a belief in God. The other impact religiously, at my middle brother Joel's bar mitzvah when he was 13, there was a terrible, terrible traffic accident right outside the synagogue involving my relatives. My uncle was killed, my aunt lost her hand, and that whole experience with a religious event and tragedy and happiness at the same time formed the way that I never looked at religion simply. I had friends who thought if you were religious, if you did good in life, you wouldn't suffer. That experience told me everything was ultimately more complex, and I've struggled with that idea ever since.
And how old were you when that happened?
I was 2 years older than him, so I was 15, and my relatives were parked right in front of. Actually, leaving the service, my brothers and I were in the parking lot waiting for our parents, and a truck was coming down the hill. It was a flatbed carrying swerve. The chain snapped, and this giant thing, whatever it was, landed on the car with all my relatives. My mother was such a strong, strong woman. It's the only time in my life that I remember that she lost control and was blaming herself. But it was a terrible, terrible accident.
Wow. Those are some pretty compelling and poignant, I guess is the better word, stories that really give us a good idea of your growing up. So thank you for that. So now, what is the story, Arnie, of your becoming a rabbi?
Well, it was because of a Christian chaplain. Deep down, I guess I always had some thought about being a rabbi because my grandfather was a rabbi, but he never learned English. He wrote a lot in Hebrew and Yiddish. He had this long beard. So I kind of dismissed the idea, thinking you had to have a long beard and
Right.
a different way of being born than I did. But when I went to Vietnam, and that was my first assignment after college, I was in the rivers of Vietnam, as you mentioned, part of this Operation Game Warden, keeping the rivers free from Viet Cong. I also was on the first ship that went into Cambodia when Nixon ordered us in, and no one in the rivers had enough personnel to justify a full-time chaplain. So there was one chaplain who was a circuit rider for all of the Mekong Delta. And the first time he visited my ship after I had reported, he said to me, "You're Jewish. I need a point of contact for questions about Jewish holy days." So in the Navy, we call that the Jewish lay leader. So he made me the Jewish lay leader for the ship, eventually for the whole Mekong Delta. And he started to talk to me and said he knew that at Jewish seminaries, rabbinical schools, there were special programs for people who did not have a very religious background. And that's what happened. So thanks to him, I had another assignment after Vietnam in naval intelligence, but I already started corresponding with the rabbinical school. And they put me in the special program where for a whole year, they just prepared me to take the entrance exam. I became, I passed and became a rabbi, and really it was because of this Christian chaplain, Lester Westling.
So that's an amazing story. How was Vietnam for you? I mean, you were a religious person. You had already had some pretty intense experiences with religion, and in your young life, and then you go off to war. Uh, what was that like for you?
Well, it was um, complicated, like so many things in life are. We had about 10 officers and 90 sailors on this ship. Uh, we would go in. We needed 11 feet of water, so during the rainy season we could go all the way up. That's how we went into Cambodia. But during the dry season, we'd go as far as we could, anchor, and then we would become the mothership, the command ship for all the small boats in the river. We would resupply them, and we had some. We I was frightened all the time, and I, if I had more time, I'd tell you some funny stories. But the story that I remember the most was when one of the small boats came toward us, and there was something in the water. It was dragging it, and when it came close to us, we saw it was a body. The Viet Cong had attacked, and they had killed one of the attackers. And I wouldn't call that an atrocity because there was already a dead body, but still, it left such a bad taste in my mouth just watching. We all waited to see what the captain would say. And he got those people from the boat, pulled them on board, and he said, I want you to remember that every time we go to war, we fight two enemies. One is the outside enemy. This time it's the Viet Cong. We'll fight them hard, we'll fight them smart. But the other is the internal enemy, and that's the animal within you that wants to take over. So you don't care about right and wrong. You just thirst for blood. And as long as you work for me, you'll fight both those enemies, or you won't fight either because I'm going to send you to the brig. That was another moment in my life that shaped my view. And I've tried to remember that all my time as a chaplain, helping other people fight that inside enemy.
Wow. Okay. So this Christian chaplain convinced you to become a rabbi. And then so when you got home from Vietnam, how long were you there?
I was in Vietnam a year, and then I had 2 more years because I had been NROTC in college preparing so I could be an officer after graduation.
Okay.
So 2 years I served with Naval Intelligence, again, corresponding with rabbinical school. They recommended books for me to read. So then I went to rabbinical school, and knowing my plan was to come back as a chaplain just for one assignment, because this man, Chaplain Westling, had changed my life. I wanted to use him as a model and help others in their spiritual journeys. And I also loved the idea that a chaplain could be deeply religious himself or herself, but work with people with no religion. A lot of civilians don't know that in the U.S. military, the only person with 100% confidentiality is the chaplain, more than lawyers, more than doctors, even more than psychiatrists. So people come to the chaplain sometimes with religious questions, but just sometimes with human questions. They're afraid, they're alone, they're lonely, they wrestle with the idea of war. And I wanted to help them the way that Chaplain Westling had helped me. And so it ended up that instead of just one assignment for 3 years, I ended up serving 25 years as a chaplain.
Wow. Um, what so what are some of the toughest questions you heard as a chaplain, or what are some of the most, deeply held things you heard as chaplain that
Well,
really moved you?
yeah, it's funny. Sometimes it was just a person who was so tired of making believe that he was macho, that he was Superman. Uh, they would come in and they'd show me a picture of the dog that they missed, their pet at home. Other times they come and they talk about larger issue of war. And, I would tell them there's a Jewish story from the Bible where Moses sees one of the Egyptian taskmasters beating one of the other slaves, and he was going to beat him to death. And Moses looks around, and the Jewish teaching is he didn't see anyone else that would help, so he helped. And so the teaching is, where there is no man, you be a man, or more poetically, where there is no humanity, you be humanity. So I would tell these sailors and officers also, we can't decide whether our country should be here in Vietnam, but we can be the humanity. We can be the good higher angel, not the lower angel. We can do what we can for the situation that we're in. And I think that helped a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. I want to get to your experience in Beirut. This is, an event that's well known, very tragic. This was when the Marine Barracks was bombed in 1983. You were there. You had some experiences there that you then wrote down, and President Reagan, at his request, you wrote down, and then he used. Give us a brief understanding for lots of our listeners that may not be super familiar, what was going on, why the Marines were there, what were you doing there, and then your experience on that day.
At that point, from 1982 to 1984, I was one of 3 chaplains on the flagship. That's what we call the ship with the admiral, for the commander of the 6th Fleet. All the U.S. Navy ships in the Mediterranean are part of the 6th Fleet, and there's a 3-star admiral who was in charge. It was an experiment to have a rabbi, a priest, and a minister on his staff. We were home ported in Gaeta, Italy, a small town in Italy, but we would cover the Mediterranean. And part of my job was to visit every ship in the Mediterranean. At that point, we had a larger Navy. It was probably 40 ships. When the Marines went into Lebanon as part of the multinational peacekeeping force, America, Great Britain, France, and Italy were part of this force that tried to put some space between the Israelis and the fighting forces in Lebanon who were fighting each other, and just buy some time. Abba even, one of the early leaders of Israel once said, the best thing the military can do is buy some time for the negotiators, for the diplomats. So that's what we were trying to do. And so I would visit the Marines, I would visit ship to ship in the Marines. This particular time, I was in Lebanon for a specific purpose. The 5th individual Marine to be killed was named Alan Seufert from New Hampshire. He was shot in the chest when he was in a Jeep examining the perimeter. And so, in Judaism, we try to bury as quickly as possible, within 24 hours, if possible. So the military worked with the governor of New Hampshire, and they got the body back, not within 24 hours, but as quickly as possible. But the other Marines, we had as part of this multinational force, we had about 1,300 Americans, mostly Marines, but we also had men from the other services. And just out of respect for Seufert, they wanted a Jewish chaplain to hold a memorial service for him. So that's the reason I went there. And I remember when I got there, it was a Friday, and as part of the service, we did the 23rd Psalm, and the 2 chaplains with the Marines, one was Protestant, one was Catholic. I had them join me, and we held hands for the 23rd Psalm to symbolize that religions could get along. And one day, that was the dream for Lebanon and for the Mideast. But then Colonel Garrity, the officer in charge of the Marines, said to me, tomorrow, which would have been Saturday, we'll get you back started toward Italy, maybe only as far as Cyprus. It was very complicated to travel then. But I said, I don't travel on Shabbat, my Sabbath. So that's the only reason that I didn't leave on Saturday. And I was there on Sunday morning, October 23rd at 6:22 a.m. A terrorist in a van loaded with explosives under gas pressure rammed into the building. There were 2 buildings about 50 yards apart. Whenever I visited, I would alternate one or the other because the Catholic chaplain was in one, the Protestant in the other. This time, I was supposed to be with the Protestant chaplain. That's the building that was hit. 200 241 men killed, plus many, many more wounded. But the Catholic chaplain probably saved my life. He said, I want to talk to you about something. Who knows what it was? And so I spent the night with him. In the morning, I happened to be brushing my teeth. I had a T-shirt, trousers, and our building shook. The doors came off the hinges, windows exploded, and we all dove to the ground. We thought we had been hit by a missile or whatever, and instead, a shell, a rocket. Instead, when we started hearing all the screams from the other building, we realized all we had experienced was the shock blast. The FBI said that attack, that explosion, was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. Four-story building literally lifted off the ground and then collapsed. And we ran out. I just remember the Catholic chaplain put a purple stole around his neck because he knew he would have to be given last rites. And he said, follow me. So I followed him. And, there were bodies, pieces of bodies. And all we could do was try to help until more help came. By the way, out of the 241 men that were killed, 18 were Navy, and almost all of them were our medical personnel. Navy gives the Marines chaplains and also medical personnel. And so that just made everything harder. One story that sticks out to me because it had an impact on the whole Navy, we were literally tearing our clothes apart to wipe blood or sand or dirt from people's eyes, from their mouths, while we were waiting for other help. Eventually, ambulances came, helicopters came from the ship. But I remember tearing my T-shirt apart, using it all up, and then I used my kippah, my skull cap, and I wiped people's faces. It got bloody, it got dirty, it got lost. And when we could take a breath, when we had all the wounded people together, the Catholic chaplain, Father Pucciarelli, had never seen me with my head uncovered. So he ripped a piece of his camouflage uniform off, put it on my head. He said, I want every Marine here to remember not just that two chaplains helped them, but that two chaplains of different religions helped them. And that's who we are. And by coincidence, although, there's an expression that says coincidence is God's way of acting anonymously. So I think it was more than coincidence. But in Congress, for 2 years in a row, there had been a bill, it was called the Religious Apparel Amendment. It was going on a DOD appropriations bill to allow Jews in the military to cover their heads. For 2 years, it had been not successful. Then that story of my kippah, what the news called the camouflage kippah, was read into the congressional record in the House and the Senate, and the bill passed. And that was the beginning of major, major changes in the military when it came to religion, what we call religious accommodation, allowing people to practice their religion to the greatest extent possible while serving in the military.
Wow, what an experience. From your chaplain perspective, what did you take away from that experience? What were the things that affected you most, and what did you learn? How did that change you?
Well, one thing that I remember so vividly, in chaplain school, we had practiced war game, what would happen if, for instance, a Catholic were wounded and he wanted me to give last rites. I was the chaplain who found him. Or they would do the same thing if it was a Jewish sailor and it was the priest, who found him. And so we had talked among ourselves, chaplains, and learned what the others would like me to do. But it turned out that with all the people that I cradled, that I held, until others came and I moved on, no one asked me any religious question. Instead, it was tell my mother I loved her, or get a message to my wife. Most of them weren't old enough to even be married. And so it was human questions. They just wanted to be able to talk to someone who was going to be able to send their last words to somebody else. We just tried to be human beings at that moment. And I think we made a difference.
Had you had as a chaplain experience in wartime before that? That is actually helping people on the battlefield, or was that your first experience?
That was my first experience, uh, as I say, in chaplain school, everyone who's a chaplain has to be ordained or the equivalent of ordination for those religions that don't call it that. So you're already a rabbi, a minister, a priest, an imam, uh, but in chaplain school, and the military has three separate chaplain schools, Army, Navy, and Air Force. They teach you how to work with each other, how to work with outside agencies, Red Cross, all the other that help the military. And they try to prepare you for situations like that. And I remember so distinctly that class where we took turns being the wounded, and then others, took turns being the ones who were the first to get to them. And it made an impression on me. And it would have helped me if someone had asked me to do something religious. But at this point, I think the chaplain just symbolizes humanity, that we're that person. Just we want to help, and people respond that way.
What's it like? I'm assuming you had, maybe I shouldn't assume this. Did people die in your arms as you cradled them that day?
No, no. Thankfully, all the people that I reached were taken to hospitals. We started taking the people to Italy, to Germany. As a matter of fact, the fourth day, when the vice president and the commandant of the Marine Corps, P.X. Kelly, and my admiral all came, the commandant of the Marine Corps invited me to go with him, and that's when I finally left Beirut. We went to Italy, and I was with him when he was giving Purple Hearts to wounded soldiers on the different beds in the hospital. So many people died. I know that two people who were wounded in Beirut later died, but as far as I know, none of the people that I was able to touch, that I was able to talk to, did die. And then I should say that on that day, if Vice President George H.W. Bush led the White House team, and he was the one that asked me, once my head cleared, to write a report and send it to the White House. And that's the report that President Reagan read out loud, which was a shock, but I'm very, very proud of that.
I think we'll put if there is a recording of that talk in the show notes, but at least the talk itself, the report itself, we'll make sure we put in the show notes so people can have access to that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I was 13 when that happened, and I do remember the news reports. Before we end, is there another experience that you had while being a chaplain that you would like to share with our listeners that will help them understand the role of chaplain a little bit better?
I think that the two things that come to my mind right away is chaplains help us remember, just like the chronicler in the Bible tried to remember events, but from a religious perspective. So one of the proudest things that I was involved with, as you mentioned, I was part of a group of Vietnam veterans that fought to build this Vietnam Veterans Memorial. A lot of people today don't realize how terrible it was for Vietnam veterans to come home, and chaplains, we would comfort them, and we would comfort the Vietnam veterans who stayed in the military after they came home, because they were treated like somehow they were the criminals, that they went to Vietnam, and these were young kids. And so Jan Scruggs, an enlisted man himself, had this vision. He wanted to change that. And so he was the inspiration behind building this monument. And he enlisted me because he wanted a chaplain, to help with the prayers.
Sure.
And the chief of chaplain said, we have a chaplain who wasn't in Vietnam as a chaplain. He was there as a fighting man before. And so Scruggs says that's even better. So I became very, very involved. And just to make the point of how woefully we were treated when we finally had the dedication, Veterans Day in November '82. That whole weekend, we got veterans from all over the country who were gathering for the dedication to tell their stories. And one that I'll never forget, this soldier who had been in the Army and lost his arm, he said he got out of the Army, tried to go back to college, and the first student, happened to be a woman, asked him how he lost his arm. He said, Vietnam. He said, she looked at him and said, serves you right, and walked away. I can't even tell the story without tearing up. He said that from that moment, he never told another human being that he had been in Vietnam until that weekend when we were dedicating the monument. And the goal of the monument was to change the vision of America. Back then, if someone hated the war or was against the war, they took out their hatred and hostility on the war fighters. We wanted to separate that. And I think we did. It's first of all, some people call it the Vietnam War Memorial, but it's not. It's the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the first memorial we made linked to a war that used the word veterans. And it makes no comment about the war. It doesn't glorify the war. It doesn't say the war was successful, not successful. It has almost 58,000 names on it of the people who killed. And it was just a holy place, a sacred space that we came to mourn those who died and by extension salute those who survived. So that's something. The other campaign I had took me years, but when the Days of Remembrance of the Victims of the Holocaust was established as an American 8-day period, all 50 states plus the District of Columbia were partners, but not the military. And I thought that the military had to be part of it because we were the ones that liberated the camps. We were the ones that defeated the enemy. And so I pushed and I pushed, and it went all the way to the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger back then, and we established that the military would be a part. And I remember when I was doing the research and pushing this, I remember the one slogan from the Nazis that chilled me was "life unworthy of life." That's what they called, whether it's Jews or gays or handicapped, or all the people that they decided could be executed. And, I tried to say that if there was one message from the Holocaust that we should learn in the military and out of the military, is there is no life unworthy of life. There is no life less worthy than mine. And I had the honor of giving the prayer in the Capitol when the military finally became part of this National Days of Remembrance. And I really think of all the prayers I've ever written, God was with me when I wrote one line, and I wrote in that prayer, if the day has not yet dawned, when we can see the face of others, when we can see God in the face of others, then let us see it. That's the message of the Holocaust.
Okay, well, wonderful stories, Arnie. Thank you. In closing, the last question I ask all guests is this. As we conclude, do you want to share any lessons or takeaways from chaplaincy, either in terms of important historical transformations you have charted or in terms of helping us better understand our present moment in the American narrative?
A couple very quick thoughts. When I had the honor to teach that course at the War College, Religion, War, and Peace, I ended up learning as much as the students. But one thing that we learned together is that religions are not the same, but they're not completely different. They overlap. And a lot of people say all religions are all basically the same. But, the more you know theology, the more you understand that each religion has a different vision of the goal, of the end of days, and they're mutually exclusive. So I used to tell my students, the more we focus on the end of days, the more we'll disagree based on our religions. The more we focus on the end of today, to make today a better day for those in fear, for those suffering, for those hungry, the more we can roll up our sleeves and work together. And linked to that, maybe the final thought I'll share is one of the things I said in my report to the president that ended up as a speech is I said that I would look around at the foxholes or the bunkers in Beirut, and I said many of them were religion specific. There are Christian foxholes for the Christian phalangists. There are Muslim foxholes. The Israelis had basically Jewish foxholes. But I said we Americans had interfaith foxholes. And I said maybe if the world had more interfaith foxholes, we wouldn't need so many foxholes to start with. So I believe that in the military, we're ahead of the rest of the country and maybe the rest of the world in certain ways in terms of working together side by side, having those interfaith foxholes. I hear so much today about whether diversity is good, whether diversity is bad. The one lesson I learned, I think, from the military, both as a chaplain and not as a chaplain, is what diversity means to me. It means that when I'm at a meeting and someone comes up with an idea and I think to myself, I never would have thought of that because I understand that I'm a product of my faith, my upbringing, my culture. And so we all have blinders. We need someone else to expand our vision because they have different set of blinders or a different set of vision. And so I've been touched by them, and I try to keep my thinking open to continue so I can be touched by others.
Okay, thank you, Arnie. You have the last word. We have been talking with Arnie Resnicoff, former National Director of Interreligious Affairs, American Jewish Committee, and former Special Assistant for Values and Vision, Secretary and Chief of Staff, United States Air Force Scholar in Residence. Arnie, thank you so much for your years of service, and thank you for being with us today and helping all of us comprehend the American project better by hearing your experiences as a chaplain in the United States Navy. Listeners, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please write a review.
The podcast series Religion in the American Experience is a project of the National Museum of American Religion. Episodes will be released monthly on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.